Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Well, over the years, Paddy Power has garnered a reputation for developing irreverent and provocative marketing campaigns. And my final guest is the man responsible for many of these creatives. Paul Mallon, you are the head of major brand activations with Paddy Power Betfair. But what responsibilities are attached to this particular role?
There's probably a lack of responsibility attached to the role, Karl. I think I've one of the best jobs on the planet, I think. And when you get away from the business for a couple of days and get a bit of air in your head, you appreciate it a little bit more. Number one, I work on things mainly related to sports, so that's deadly for starters. And then generally just trying to have a bit of fun and to raise attention for the brand. So, simply my job is to drive fame and talkability for the Paddy Power brand and to get us away from the crowd and get noticed by people who might not normally consider us. So I suppose it's rare enough to have a job that it's got resource, but it's also got a creative output, and you're surrounded by a lot of people who are far smarter than me as well. So it's an attractive role, brilliant company. I've been here 7 years now, I think. And it's, every week is something very, very different, and there's days and weeks where you're just hiding going, I haven't got a clue how to answer this question or how to answer this problem or where I'm going to go with this. And I suppose that's the challenge that keeps you going.
Now, Paddy Power has become famous for its irreverent promotional activities, but has it always been the company's policy to push the boundaries in this regard?
Well, so as long as I remember, before I was at the Irish Daily Star, before I joined Paddy Power, and I kind of always remembered Paddy Power being on the edge of things. You'd see a bit of Paddy Power coverage in the media. But God, I don't know where I stand on that, and I don't know, are they being provocative here? I don't know if I agree with that, and that's still where they stand. In that we probably do things that are designed to provoke a reaction, to get people thinking. And I think the company's founders, and in particular Stuart Kenny, saw it as a betting and entertainment brand. And if we're going to take your money, we're going to give you a good time for it. So from the 1988 onwards, when we were founded, they were kind of pioneering betting as not just a thing we can bet on sports, but also as an entertainment brand. And, starting with, markets on Who Shot JR and then into news events. And in recent times, then it's been able to bet on things like Strictly Come Dancing. But I think we also saw the opportunity in media for, if we create a little bit of chaos around events, that it's a really, really good way and cost-effective way of getting attention for the brand. So certainly from the 80s onwards, I think accelerated into 2000s and up to 2018, I think we've done some of our best stuff in terms of provocative marketing, yeah.
Now, the World Cup is obviously one of the busiest sporting events from a betting perspective, but to stand out in this crowded market, Paddy Power Betfair created a stunt involving a real-life polar bear. Tell us about this and the reaction which it received.
Working with a polar bear isn't something that you get to experience outside the zoo. So I think this is unusual in a number of senses, Karl, and that the idea came more than a year ago, and typically our stunts would involve a lead time of around 2 months or 6 weeks. So about a year ago, we went out looking for ideas for the World Cup, and how do we get a reaction? How do we stand out for the crowd? And an agency in the UK called Pitch Marketing Group came in with an idea about spray painting a polar bear. So obviously this made us kind of stand up and take notice. So the idea being that ahead of the World Cup, we'd show our support for England by putting a St. George's cross where it's never been, and that was on the host nation's most iconic species, because England fans bring their flags everywhere, and Russian polar bears are having a particularly hard time, with lack of access. And so, it's definitely provocative, definitely attention grabbing, but it's pretty hard to find a polar bear willing to get spray painted. So over the course of last year, we've tried to source a polar bear, and that, obviously isn't easy. So we looked at an animatronic polar bear, and I think Greenpeace had used one in a bit of marketing in the UK. And we thought it was just a bit rigid, or maybe because somebody else had used it, we'd try something different. We spoke to a zoo in the UK who had a polar bear, and had discussions with them. Would they let us spray paint one of the bears? So actually spray paint it until it was voted down, probably sensibly by the board. Until we found a guy in Vancouver called Mark Dumas who owns a privately owned polar bear called Aggie. So in February, we travelled to Vancouver with a crew with Polar Bears International as well, who were monitoring the stunt to make sure everything was above board. And so we filmed Aggie we took her on a trailer, like 5-hour drive from Vancouver into the middle of British Columbia, and filmed with her there. And sprayed her or really didn't spray her, because a couple of weeks before the owner decided that, look, you're not really going to spray my bear, are you? And we thought we could use, in a very ethical way, animal-friendly paint, which would wash off after a period of time. But the problem is that with polar bear hairs, it wouldn't have washed off for about a year.
Right.
And Mark, the owner, decided that, like, no matter what happens, he didn't want his bear with an England flag on his side for more than a year. So we had to come up with another solution. So while we filmed the real bear, we then sprayed separately a polar bear felt, and with a company called Frame Store, who have done the movie Fantastic Beasts and other Oscar-winning work, they applied some amazing camera work to actually then, provide a hoax version of us spray painting a bear. And then the reveal came that, we haven't really spray painted a bear. We've worked with Polar Bears International on this for more than a year, and we're funding 2 of their programs in the Russian Arctic, research and tagging programs with polar bears in the Russian Arctic. So, unusual for us in the amount of time we spent on it, and some pretty big results as well in terms of awareness.
Now, you certainly pulled out all the stops in that one. Now, some of the campaigns which have been deployed by Paddy Power Betfair have received a backlash from the public. Do you ever fear the backlash which certain promotional campaigns may cause? And how do you deal with this negative feedback when it occurs, Paul?
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose we're not really scared of a backlash as long as we're not just shocking people for the sake of it. I think sometimes shock is good in terms of shocking people to challenge their beliefs and what's wrong and what's right. And, we live in a pretty shocking society where, the BBC and RT and 2FM and everybody will be, doing some stuff that's pretty close to the edge. I think it's critical that, we're punching up and picking our targets and not punching down. And maybe a few years ago in 2012 and 2013, when we were still a cheeky Irish bookmaker, it was a little bit easier to get away with stuff. And as you become a bigger company and a FTSE 100 company, it's definitely harder to pick your targets. But I'd say we're fine with the backlash. And even internally, that's something we have to manage in terms of staff getting onto us going, hang on, did you really use a polar bear for marketing? And, you're duping your colleagues and you're duping the public. And, we're fine with upsetting snowflakes of this generation if, especially, there's a little bit of a rug pull and there's a reveal behind it. I would say we try to temper that in terms of, like, when we looked at the World Cup, for example, we knew we were going to do this thing with a polar bear, but we have a range of other things as well, Karl. So, gay goals is a thing we've done with the Russian team for the World Cup. So every time they score a goal, we're giving £10,000 to an LGBT charity in the UK. So Russia, who has a questionable attitude towards towards homosexuality and other things, we're actually making the Russian team fund anti-homophobia campaigns. So we will try to look at our marketing as a bigger piece and go, right, if we're doing a shocking piece here, let's try to, balance that with something a little bit more, we say heart to goal, ball to steal, heart to goal somewhere else, So try to look at everything together and just, splurting out campaigns as a one-off without any sense behind them.
Now, I remember speaking to somebody in the marketing team in Ryanair a number of years ago, and they told me that Michael O'Leary's approach to publicity was that we have 2 options. We can go out and buy ad space, or we can go out and we can shock the public and get it for free. Have you a similar approach in Paddy Power Betfair to that?
We did kind of figure out pretty early on that, creating clever, not just shocking, but creating clever, sharp-witted campaigns is a really good way of getting news media to write about you, and it's far more valuable to get good editorial space or good TV coverage than it is to just take out, a page 9 ad in a newspaper and having somebody consume something without a reaction. Getting somebody to react and getting somebody to engage with your brand is essential. Free publicity is great. Yeah, I think Michael O'Leary is obviously one of the masters of it and still doing a great job at it. So I wouldn't argue with him in any sense, yeah. And
from a creative perspective, is there a particular process which the team follows when creating a new campaign?
Yeah, I think, Karl, everything starts with the insight and being able to explain it in one line what you're trying to do. And maybe even something like the polar bear stunt, which you did, suffered a little bit from its complexity. If we go back to maybe the 2014 World Cup and we worked with Stephen Hawking, and the idea there was that England are famous for taking rubbish penalties at the World Cup. We get the world's smartest man to come up with a theory on how to take the perfect penalty. So you should be able to explain something that zippy in terms of what is your insight and what's, that's the start of the process. So why are we doing this and what's a brilliant insight into it? Then the challenge is that by and large you're dealing with a lot of the same events every year. So you've got a Cheltenham in March, you've got every second year, either a Euros or a World Cup and the Premier League in a very formulaic thing. So, the cycle of events doesn't change that much, and you kind of rely on then something like a pope visiting or a new pope to come up and really throw this great curveball at you in terms of creativity. What we see, at the moment is with Donald Trump, we have no shortage of agencies or internally people just throwing these ideas about, what to do with Donald Trump. And here's a great idea involving a hot air balloon which looks like Donald Trump, but we've seen that idea 3 times now. We're still not running with it because, in terms of Trump, and one of the guys from South Park said this, nothing is funnier than a monkey running into a wall. And that's what Trump is. Like, how do you come up with a marketing or a stunt that is funnier than Trump? Or how do you compete? Because the minute you come up with something, he's on Twitter doing something more outrageous anyway. So I've completely gone off track here, Karl. But in terms of the process, starts with the insight. We look at the events that are coming up. It's not dissimilar to a news story. Who, why, what, when, and where. We look at the audience, and what's the reaction or what's the success from this stunt going to lead to, and then work backwards a little bit.
And what timelines do you work to when creating a new campaign?
So some of our best stuff can be really reactive and really instant. We have turned around press ads within a day and got it out depending on the news event, and that stuff is brilliant. So, anything from a day. Polar Bear was more than a year. The time we got Floyd Mayweather to wear lucky pants for the weigh-in against McGregor, that took about 4 or 5 weeks from coming up with the idea to, convincing him to do it. It can vary from turn around a brilliant reactive press ad in 24 hours to more than a year. We're getting better at the longer-term planning stuff. It hasn't always been our strength, I think.
And while there's a definitive hint of mischief in the promotional campaigns, is consistency still the number one priority for you?
Yeah, consistency can seem like a really lame or boring word, can't it? But when I joined here in 2011 or 2012, we were using all kinds of different fonts and different tones of voice, and some people thought the brand was one thing, and other people in the UK thought the Paddy Power brand meant a different thing. So getting that consistency right is really hard, like down to the simple things like brand colours, the same brand colours, the same tone of voice, the same brand guidelines, not being too smutty or smart, and that consistency and making. If you're going to, try all this content on Twitter and give people, email marketing campaigns and TV marketing campaigns and try to get yourself in the papers with some clever PR angles, then people are consuming you in a lot of places, and you have to make sure that the brand is consistently being on the right side of clever and not veering into smuttiness or laddishness or anything like that in any of those areas. So that's really, really important.
And how do you gauge the success of specific promotional campaigns? Is it through column inches and social media coverage? Is it through public reaction? Or is it determined by increased betting activity?
So depending on the event, there's no doubt we love publicity, Karl. There's no getting away from that. So some events will give you a very quick read on how successful they are. So when Mayweather decided to wear the Paddy Power lucky pants for the weigh-in against McGregor, we could see in our sports quite quickly that there was a spike in betting on the event. So something like that is really, really successful. We have our own kind of Olympic rating system for PR coverage in terms of what's a gold medal result, what's a silver medal, and what's a bronze medal in terms of the amount of pickup it gets. We use companies like Nielsen to measure, the brand performance in the bigger stunts, again, like Mayweather looking pants and wearing the lucky pants, and, what's the value of that in terms of if you were to pay for that in advertising. I would say as well that word of mouth is huge. So getting people saying things to you that, we still get people calling out the giant Paddy Power Hollywood sign at Cheltenham from several years ago. So stuff like that stays in people's mind is huge. Or, again, to go back to the Mayweather example and the lucky pants, I was collecting my daughter from creche the week after it, and she said to me, I can't believe what he did with Mayweather, siding with Mayweather over the home guy McGregor, you filthy rascals. And then she put a fiver on McGregor because of that. So that kind of reaction is huge, and just getting that word of mouth and people talking about your brand is massive for us.
And perhaps some of our listeners this morning will be of the opinion that the company's marketing activities are so effective because of the huge budget that you have to play with. But for the SME on a tight budget, is it still possible to make a memorable impression in your opinion?
There's no doubt having a good budget, can get you, firstly onto television and can buy you up social media advertising and the rest. But, some of our best work can be incredibly cheap too in terms of, turning around clever copy on Twitter. And, that's free every single day. And that just starts with amazingly sharp-witted copywriting, plain English. An SME's flyer could be something amazing with just sharp, simple wordplay and imagery. So it's, getting those basics right, like having a clever way with words and a clever bit of imagery. It's obviously something Irish people are very good at, having a way with words and being clever there. So money definitely isn't everything, and some of our best or most successful stunts weren't that expensive. I remember we did a stunt with Sir Alex Ferguson waxwork outside Old Trafford a few years ago when David Moyes was starting and having a terrible time, where we put the Ferguson waxwork in a glass case in case of emergency, break glass. That certainly wasn't expensive, but it did a huge amount of PR. Or back in 2005, I think, when Pope Benedict was coming into power, I think Paddy himself went over to the Vatican and started taking bets in and around Vatican City on who was going to be the next Pope. So, thinking your way into coverage, can be really, really cheap, and it certainly doesn't have to be expensive.
And Paul, in general, do you find that social media is a platform that's used more for branding and creating awareness than it is for call to action?
Yeah, definitely. I would prefer it as a, just seeing it as a clever way to increase your brand awareness, and certainly don't like to be, asking people or asking your followers to just jump on and bet now, or, check out this campaign, or using it as a direct call to action. I'd certainly be a fan of, not the sell approach on it. I don't think it lands particularly well, and just seems a bit desperate or something like that. I think if you promote your brand well and effectively, however you do that, you'd hope that either technology or people would have the smarts to kind of find your brand elsewhere themselves and decide themselves if they want to, have a bet or buy a can of Coke or whatever it is you're selling, rather than, forcing people into this funnel.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
South